Al-Fatiha. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين. ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين، أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قالت لهم رسلهم إن نحن إلا بشر مثلكم ولكن الله يمن على من يشاء من عباده وما كان لنا أن نأتيكم بسلطان إلا بإذن الله وعلى الله فيتوكل المؤمنون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, I give my condolences to all of you on the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, his Ahlul Bayt, and his companions. Continue our discussion about the mission of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, after we have established that Allah has selected some individuals from among his servants to rise to a particular station, that he's delegated them as imams. Delegated some as prophets, as messengers, but also delegated and these imams, again, they fulfill the role. Of course, the 5 great imams among the prophets, the Ulul Azm, but thereafter we have the imams, the 12 imams, Ma'asumeen alayhim salatu wasalam, who fulfill and walk in the footsteps of the prophets. But their mission is the same mission, their duty is the same duty. We want to speak a little bit about this idea of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selecting his servants, because he says, as the prophets, they responded to those who doubted, they said that yes, we are human beings like you, إن نحن إلا بشر مثلكم ولكن الله يمن على من يشاء من عباده, that he blesses some of his servants. So one of the things that we want to see, or at least examine, is this idea of servitude. Because of course those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses are servants, but those servants that he blesses as well, it is for a particular reason, and that is to, again, to be exemplary servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from this we can derive, or we can conclude, that Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, that one of his missions for his journey to Karbala was to be an example of the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to show those who may have had doubt in his imamate and his leadership, those who did not understand what it truly means to be a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam Hussein's his plight, his mission was to show what a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would do. And again, that comes into the sacrifice itself. That a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will sacrifice himself, will sacrifice everything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But nonetheless, it is important to clarify this idea and this concept of al-ubudiyya, of servitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In general, we understand, or at least we know, that everything within creation, among the jinn and among the men, and among those creations that we may know or may not know about, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, they are all the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He explains in Surah Maryam, when He says, إن كل من في السماوات والأرض إلا آتي الرحمن عبدا. That everything, or rather there's nothing in the heavens and earth that would not come before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a servant. In other words, whatever is in the heavens, whatever is in the earth, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, or whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, that when they are before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that their station is a station of ubudiyya. And this is despite whether they realize this or not. If they realize that the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they realize that they are the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then yes, they will go forth, they will obey the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If they do not realize it, they are still the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are still subservient to the nature and to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put into order. The order of cause and effect. That they are subservient to these things, so therefore they are the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So everything is the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every being that He has created. So here, when He says that He is selected from among those servants, so we need to ask that, what type of servant, what type of ubudiyya and servitude must that individual have that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will select him or her to deliver the message, to guide mankind. And of course, I guess from our limited understanding of ibadah, we know that there are two types of ibadah. At least one is a very general type of ibadah and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that comes in many different forms. For example, if one is studying, that's considered ibadah. If one is earning money in order to take care of himself, in order to take care of his family, this is also considered ibadah. One who protects his or her family, as the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that one who defends and protects his family, this is also considered ibadah. The other type of ibadah is very specific. The ibadah that we do every day, we pray 5 times a day. In the month of Ramadan, we fast for the entire month of Ramadan. We go to Hajj. So these are very specific ibadah. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's selecting, He says that He has chosen يَمُنَّ عَلَى مَن يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. What type of ibadat is that servant engaged in? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He focuses on this point, that He's selecting from among His servants. Of course, without doubt, they must fulfill the specific types of ibadah, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obliged all Muslims, all who submit to Him. The prayer, the fasting, the Hajj, Jihad, they must fulfill these things. But in addition to that, they are also engaged in other types of ibadah, the general type of ibadah. And even beyond this, their ibadah must be at the highest level of ibadah. And we understand this again from the statement of Rasulullah, at least the totality of what the Prophet has stated and what the Imams ﷺ have stated about ibadah. To give one example, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he states that mal ibadah illa bil yaqeen, that there's no ibadah, there's no worship without certainty. In other words, if one does not have certainty, then he or she has not made ibadah, hasn't worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course we explained before the different levels of certainty. At the very least, one must have ilmul yaqeen, certainty and knowledge, that I'm certain that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He wants me to make this prayer. Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr. I'm certain, I know it's my obligation, so therefore having certainty and knowledge will lead you to praying. But if we take this on a higher level, as we had stated before, that the imam, or those who have this, or who've been delegated with imamat, with this type of leadership, that they have haqqul yaqeen. Not only certainty in knowledge, certainty in perception, but certainty in reality, or absolute certain with regards to their worship, with regards to their ibadah, their servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that ibadah, or that servant who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selects, is in this category, that his ibadah fits this description. Moreover, it fits this description which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives in the Quran about worship, about servitude. Because again, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He stated about the imams, or those who are delegated in that position, that these are individuals that have certainty with regards to the signs, the ayat. وَكَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يُوقِنُونَ, that they must have certainty with regards to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed. So therefore, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed about servitude in the Quran, not only are they certain with regards to the knowledge of what was revealed, to his perception, but also certainty to the point that they call haqqul yaqeen, certainty and reality. And as we mentioned, that certainty and reality, haqqul yaqeen, that there's a union between the individual who has certainty and that thing which he has certainty about, meaning that they are experiencing that. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He explains about ibadah in the Quran, in one case He states that ibadah must be coupled with tawheed, understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's oneness. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states, وَأَرْسَلْنَا وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُولًا, that we have only sent the prophets. And when we have sent the prophets, نُوحِي إِلَيْهِ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا فَاعْبُدُونِ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states that when He has sent forth His prophet, that He has sent them forth with this wahi, with this revelation, with this message, La ilaha illa ana, that there is no God, there is no deity except for me. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to His prophet, and because there's no deity, there's no divinity except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fa'buduni. So therefore, worship is exclusively for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first aspect of ibadah that one must have, or at least especially those who are selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they delegate, is that they must have this certainty of tawheed. In fact, their ibadah, their worship, should be such that when they are worshiping, we understand that their focus is only on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That their worship in and of itself is an example of Tawheed. One of the examples that we see in the history of Islam, of course, we know that the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's no doubt about his understanding of Tawheed, and that his worship in itself was exemplary of his worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, exemplary of that understanding that he had about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That for him to take upon the mission that he did in order to be an iconoclast, that the entire nation of Arabs were going in one direction, which was against the Tawheed and oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Prophet came and he went against that. Again, this shows his understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and this concept of Tawheed. But also we see another example in Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi afdalus salatu wassalam. Particularly when Imam Ali alayhi afdalus salatu wassalam, in one of the battles, he had been shot with an arrow. An arrow was shot into his leg. And when some individuals, they came, they wanted to take the arrow out of his leg, it pained him too much. He said, leave it, just leave it. It's better that you leave it because it is difficult to take out at this point. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, knowing that the level of concentration, the level of connection that Imam Ali alayhi wasallam had in his ibadah, that when he worshipped, when he began to pray, that there was nothing else that existed for him but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That he was engulfed in Tawheed and in the understanding of Tawheed and the understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet said, if you cannot take it out now, wait. Let him pray, and when he begins to pray, at that moment you take the arrow out of his leg. He said, because when he prays, his focus is nowhere except for on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His focus is nowhere except for on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So at that point, when he went to pray, then the arrow was taken out of his leg. And again, because this was known that Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, that when he prays, that nothing else matters but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why he could never be defeated in battle, that when he was martyred, it was when he was in salat, when he was in prostration, because the coward who murdered Imam Ali alayhi wasallam, he could not stand face to face with Amir al-Mu'mineen. So he waited until his focus was completely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that was the time that he came to martyr Imam Ali. So ibadah, in one aspect, it must exemplify, it must be the example of Tawheed. And this is what Imam Hussein alayhi wasalam, this was his mission. To raise the banner of Tawheed. To be an example of one of the greatest servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, we find in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's definition or his explanation of Tawheed, we see that Tawheed is that which separates the one who serves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it separates them from those who do shirk or ascribe partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or anyone who has any form of association with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll explain this a little bit more, but as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states in the Quran, and this is a beautiful verse of the Quran because it goes hand in hand with the verse that we recited. The prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they stated that, yes, we are like you. There's no difference between our humanity. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَمُنَّ عَلَى مَن يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He blesses some individuals from among His servants. In this particular verse, in Surah Al-Kahf, last verse of Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells the Prophet, قُلْ, He says, say, tell your people, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ. He says, tell them, say that you are a human being like them. يُوحَى إِلَيَّ. But the difference between you and I, that while we share a common feature, a common aspect in our humanity, the difference is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He reveals His message to me. يُوحَى إِلَيَّ أَنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. And what does He reveal to the Prophet? That your God is one God. Not these many idols that the people were worshipping at the time. فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا. He says, He says, and whosoever wishes to meet and return back to his Lord, his Creator, then he must do so with righteous deeds. And he must do so by not ascribing or not sharing his worship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That no one should be a partner in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean by this? Shirk, or ascribing partnership with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are different levels of shirk. And we can't go into all of the levels at this time, but one of the most prominent aspects of shirk, one is called shirkun khafi, and second, shirkun jali. Shirkun khafi means that this is a hidden or undisclosed type of shirk, association. The other is shirkun jali, open polytheism, open association with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So shirkun jali, for example, if a person creates idols and they start worshipping those idols, or they say that there's more than one God, this is polytheism as we commonly know it. Shirkun jali. The other, shirkun khafi, the undetected, you may want to call it, undetected type of association with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what type of shirk is this? This is when a person, perhaps they claim that they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They at least have an understanding, at least a theological understanding that, well, there is one God, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent prophets, and I'm following those prophets.